Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we're going to cover L'Île des Mers Gelées from Thorgal, the island by the frozen seas, or the island of the frozen seas. I think the official translation is of the frozen seas. It's one of those translations that's a little bit weird. This is the second volume in the entire series and does display quite a few interesting things. We've been covering Thorgal earlier in the channel history, but it's been a little while since we've visited France's favorite Conan XP. Overall, this character has been around since 1977, so nowadays it's like 46 years old, but it is still should be considered one of the more recent big time Franco-Belgian comic in a way. It's in that second generation of comics from Franco-Belgian authors, so it does build on a lot of other works in a way. It does have the same aesthetics as Conan, especially some of these mid 70s, early 80s Conan comics from Marvel. But there's a lot of differences in the fact that while he does look like Conan, Thorgal is basically his absolute opposite. He is peace loving, not glory seeking. He prefers to outwit things rather than outpower them. As I was saying, this is a sequel to the first story of Thorgal, La Magicienne Trahie, which is one of my first videos I've covered on this channel. And in this first story, Thorgal rescues his fiancee from both a repressive father and a mysterious witch from the frozen seas, which kind of mixes with what we see here. It gives us more origins and backgrounds on our character, but we also visited his origins in another video covering another Thorgal story in the past. If you're interested in this character, do look up my Thorgal playlist. It should give you a little bit more things to look at. And I do believe we'll be able to do a few more Thorgal video in the future. I've got the last story of L'Enfant des Étoiles I could do, and Les Trois Vieillards d'Aran, which is the third book in the series. So we've got a series of book that we have available, and the further volumes or different volumes are easily available to me at a reasonable price at this point. So our main character here will be Thorgal Heersen, who's an outsider from the Vikings where he lives. He is, he was raised by the Vikings, but he is not a Viking as he was found drifting in the sea. He is about to marry the princess of the Northern Vikings, but afterwards he will leave their country. In this story, we do have the first real instance of Thorgal being shown as a fantastic archer, and he is very different from the Vikings who raised him due to his kindness, his optimism, and his desire for peace. He doesn't want to become a leader. That's one of the things we see in this book as well. But it is clear that he could be a very good leader if he wanted to. And here we have Thorgal aiming with his longbow. Second important character in this story is Bjorn Gandalf's son, who is the son of Gandalf the Mad, who's Thorgal's father-in-law, brother of Aricia, who is Thorgal's wife to be. He is a bit jealous of Thorgal, but he is ready to work for him, for and with him a lot more than his father ever was to reach his objective. He doesn't really have the respect of his people, just like his father. He has a hard time leading his people, basically. He's still a good fighter and a great shot with a bow, just as Thorgal kind of is. So this is a kind of a foil to Thorgal. The last important character here is the dominant lord, or the lord with three eagles, as he is called. Basically, the leader of the frozen island dominant tribe or dominant leaders. Heavily armored, heavily armed, controls three very large eagles. I would say probably from the look of them RP eagles, even though those live in Central America. But you know, it's kind of weird. But to have eagles that large, it's about the only real animals I can think of in those kind of sizes. He's the leader of a group of slug warriors. They look to be Inuit, or Inuit would be the most accurate term for them, I think. And he captures slaves and protects the assets of the dominant group, which is a massive coal mine and a strange palace on the frozen isle, which is more than likely Greenland. The story starts with Aricia and Thorgal getting ready to get married, Alicia is talking to one of her childhood friend and discussing her future as she's going to leave the Northern Viking settlement. At the same time, Thorgal is participating in an archery contest where the Vikings have to shoot an eagle that is tied up to a tree. In this case, it is one of the three eagles of our antagonist. This is just to tie everything together. Suddenly, two of the eagles kidnap Alicia and deliver her to the armored figure of the dominant lord, and her friend runs to meet with the Viking party so they can go and rescue her. Before that happens, though, we do have a small scene with Thorgal and Bjorn challenging each other to the archery contest. Thorgal cuts the rope that is tying the eagle to the tree with an arrow, freeing the bird as something that he prefers rather than killing the free bird, unknowingly releasing the third of the eagles of the Lord of Three Eagles. This shows once again the kindness of our main character. Alicia's best friend meets up with them and tells them that she's been kidnapped, and Thorgal and Bjorn get ready to give chase. Bjorn gets a Drakkar ready to go after them on the seas, while Thorgal gets his horse and races down the beach just to see the Dominant's boat leave the area. He's not able to catch them. We have a very nice panel here of the horse racing on the beach. It's very interesting in its composition. On the seas, right after, Bjorn gets into an argument with his crew after a few days of giving chase because the rest of the crew doesn't want to keep giving chase. The leader of the rest of the Viking is Joran the Bull, who is not ready to follow them to their death. And at that point, Thorgal actually agrees with him, saying that they're not ready to go in the frozen seas. They don't have enough food, they don't have enough weapons, they don't have enough things to keep warm. Bjorn kind of gets mad at that point and says that the Vikings never give up. And, well, Joran decides to knock some sense into him. Of course, after knocking some sense into him, he goes the step further and puts him in a canoe where he would probably drift and die. Thorgal opposes him, even though he doesn't seem to have a great love for Bjorn. Thorgal does have his general kindness, and well, Thorgal gets the exact same treatment. Right after this happens, however, the sailless boat of the dominant tribe, the Frozen Isle, reaches them. It's basically a boat with no sails or oars, so a more or less modern boat, I would say. It moves in to capture the Drakkar of the Vikings, probably hoping to capture Thorgal at the same time. They use arrows laden with a net. Fairly nice image of that at the top there. Not super easy to draw. And after that's done, the Eagles go and drop little packages of numbing gas who stun everybody on the boat who are captured as slaves. As Thorgal and Bjorn are drifting away on the frozen seas, Thorgal gets a quick dream sequence where he meets up with Alicia, but everything he touches in a lush garden freezes and dies. The dream ends with him being separated from his love once again, and he wakes up in the canoe with Bjorn. Boatmen are more or less freezing to death. They don't have anything to row the boat or go anywhere. Bjorn gets mad by the cold, seeing Thorgal and wanting to drink his blood because his blood would be warm. They get into a fist fight. Bjorn gets knocked off the boat onto an iceberg, and the two men drift away after Thorgal tries to rescue him, even though they were in a fight just a few seconds before. We get a bit of a jump here. I don't know exactly how long. It's not precise in the book, but we get a pair of little Inuit kids hunting in Greenland, starting a fire to grill a rabbit. The oldest seemed to have caught with a slingshot, and as the rabbit is being cooked, we see Thorgal show up half dead from exposure, steals the meal, and starts eating it. The children threaten Thorgal, but are stopped by the tribe's elder, who can speak Danish because he learned it from others in the mines where the dominant drop off their slaves to work for them. And he brings Thorgal to the main cave where the rest of the tribe resides. And they meet back up with Bjorn, who's not too happy to see Thorgal, but they kind of understand each other. The tribe leader explains to them that there's a group of godlike beings on the frozen isle called the Dominants, who basically rule the land and have been keeping most of the Inuits as well as all sorts of other people as slaves in either as soldiers or as miners in their giant mines. We learned that in the past, those beings came after a giant cataclysm that tore the sky, and they enslaved the majority of the locals. And it feeds the coal requirement of their giant palace that they have on the island. Bjorn's father, Gandalf the Mad, wanted to basically marry the queen of the Frozen Isles, which was Sliv in the previous book, for those mines, thinking they were going to be gold and precious stones. But in the end, we learned that it's only black rocks which burns, implying that it's coal. Thorgal and Bjorn agree to help, and they lead the small tribe of Inuits to go and fight the Lord with three eagles. That's their main goal at that point. I would have probably given more clothes to Thorgal and Bjorn at that point, but that's just how the artist did it. As they meet with the Lord of Three Eagles, he calls for Thorgal to move forward and drops his weapon in a sign of peace, but Bjorn shoots an arrow at him before they can discuss anything. As the arrow hits, the eagles fly towards Bjorn and tear him apart. And we learn that the Lord of Three Eagle is actually the daughter of the witch queen Sliv, who was in the we saw more of in the previous book. It's an unfortunate death that probably should have been avoided. Thorgal does rescue the people in the mines afterwards, including Yoren the Bull, who he rescues. They still have strength, so they decide that they will all go together to the Dominant's Palace to interrogate whoever is still in charge there. They reach the palace. The rest of the Vikings run away as the whole thing starts glowing weird colors and making humming sounds. Only Thorgal is brave enough to go in. He goes down the entire building and finds what looks like an auditorium from what we see here, where Aricia is resting. He meets up with her, and she tells him that there's only one person left in the entire building, and that she is hiding further down. And we meet with the witch Sliv, who's just sitting on what appears to be some sort of throne in the middle of a mausoleum with a ton of people in dead glass tubes. Not sure what they're supposed to be representing here, but that's how they've done it. And at that point, we get a massive chunk of exposition explaining to us who the dominants are and who Thorgal is. Basically, they're a group of spacefarers that were on Earth in the past and decided to come back. Sliv says that everybody else got a strange illness in the past and died recently. She and her daughter were the last one alive. She wanted to have Thorgal marry her daughter to keep the line alive for her people, but unfortunately, this did not come to be. Slivda says that she is going to die soon and disappears and leaves Thorgal to go on his way. After a few days, they build a few more Drakkar, or probably recover some from what was captured by the dominants in the past. They get 5 Drakkar filled with people, and they take the liberated slaves back down south, either to Denmark or the more general Norwegian area, that whole region there in the Scandinavian, or Iceland. Not quite sure. It would probably depend on where they end up going. So this is a fairly long story, it is tight because of how many scenes there are. It's a weird bit of pacing at the end with the huge chunk of exposition. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So it is a harder story to go through. For the cover of this volume, it is a fairly strong one. All the Thorgal volume have that strong branding at the top with the 2 dragon heads and the name, followed by the name of the volume and the artist and scenario. Most of the first volumes are going to be by Van Ham and Rosinski. It changes as time goes on. There's a few different groups that worked on Thorgal over the years, but overall it's still a fairly tight group of people who worked on it, unlike American comics where it changes every couple of issues. We have the fairly menacing element of our main villain in the forefront, our hero pointing a sword at it, the eagles flying in the back, all elements that you're going to have in the story. It's very representative of what's going to happen. The story taking place in Greenland means that the background color of white on white here really works with the lines showing like a blizzard. That's not what happens in the story, but it does give a better image to the story here. This is going to be a very strong cover, draw your attention really quickly. I don't see anything wrong with this particular book as far as the cover goes, at least. This is standard Franco-Belgian fare when you look at the book itself. It's a very good quality hardcover, kind of glossy. It doesn't damage very easily either. It doesn't bump or scratch as easily as some other hardcovers that I've seen. We've got tick pages that are of great quality. It's not gloss, which is standard in French comic. There's nothing unusual here as far as that goes. The back has a list of all currently published volumes for Thorgal at the time of the publishing of this particular book. This is a recent copy, so we have pretty much all the books that are available now. I think there's one new book afterwards that isn't on the list from what we have here, which is Goodbye Alicia, which is the latest book in the series. There's been a few integral compilations of Thorgal as well. I've never seen one in the wild. I've seen them online. It might be an idea to hunt for some of those if I want to save some money. Uh, we also get at the last page of the book itself, rather than on the back cover, the read order for Thorgal, starting with La Jeunesse de Thorgal, which is his youth, the first few books here in line. So it's and the two side series, Chris de Valnor and Louvre, Louvre being Thorgal's daughter, Chris de Valnor being his version of Red Sonja, or Red Sonja would probably be the best comparison here. So it's a fairly comprehensive series here. There's a lot of things you can read if you start from the top. As far as artistic merit goes, Rosinski goes with artistic realism quite a bit in these books, which was unusual at the time. French comics at the time were still very comedic. Even the longer stories, you still had caricatural style in many things. In the 60s and 70s, well, in the 70s where this book was published, that's where we started to have more of those fairly realistic books. The Bombaran was at the top of their game. You had a few new things like Corto Maltese starting to come out. So you add a little bit more of this realistic style coming in, which is why this year was not completely unusual, but was still new enough that it interested a large number of people. This is very comparable to William Vance at that point. If you look at Bombaran of the time and this, you're going to have the same coloring style, similar styles of characters, very realistic, obviously, but nothing exaggerated. And they're going to try to avoid stereotypes as much as possible. Saying that, however, we do have a very wide range of characters. You've got your basic Vikings with Bjorn. He does have that very Nordic look to him. Thorgal, who looks like a comedian. We've got the Inuit children and the Inuit adults that we see through the book, which are very nice. It's not a style of character you see very often in comics in general. So it's nice to see something a bit different. And we have Sliv and her daughter, who have that 80s air to them, even though this was published in the 70s, late 70s. They have that very over the top look at the same time, but none of them look out of place in this. The Eagles throughout this book always look really good. You have to realize, once again, you don't have reference material online, so you have to work from books and pictures. Not always the easiest thing to do. We see them through all sorts of angles as well, which shows a good understanding of the animal themselves. We only have one panel with a very nice snow air as well, so the animal work is very good overall. So that's an interesting aside. You don't always expect that in these types of book. The boats also are very, very nice. The Drakkar looks like a Drakkar. I don't like the solid wood headpiece at the front with the cross. Kind of a little bit of a weird piece in a way, but still workable for what we have here. And it looks as a Drakkar should, while the sailless boat of the dominant tribe has that very Greek and Egyptian look to it, which kind of works as we read through the stories here that the Children of the Stars are supposed to be Atlanteans, which would fit that Greek, Egyptian, Eastern Mediterranean kind of aesthetics at the point. So it really works. We don't not explained how the boat works, obviously, but it is a nice looking boat. There, I guess that's the best way to say it. The ship to ship battle itself is also really well drawn. The netting on the arrows. We have a volley of arrow before the net as well, which uses rope cutter arrows. It's very clear what kind of weapon is being used. This is a nice interpretation of what kind of ship to ship battle you would have in, let's say, early 1000 early 10th century, 9th, 10th, 11th century, between Drakkars and other galley style boats. The lighting effects are also really good in there. We have a few campfires when we're dealing with the Inuit and the Inuit tribe in their cave. So we have that nice yellow glow that comes from the fire. So it looks much more like they're lit by the fire. So you don't have the clear color of anything, but you can still see how it is. And you've got that purple glow within the ship, the dominant within the spaceship that they use. So it's a nice element there. As far as story element goes, I'll be honest here, this book would make very little sense if you have not read the previous one, as both of them were pretty much sequentially published through Magazine Tintin. It's not super terrible for the original readers. For people trying to get the compiled works or the actual published works, might have been a little bit more difficult because those books are never super cheap. I mean, depends on how the kid or young adult would want to make his money. It kind of makes it weaker than most standard pulp comics, in my opinion, because it really sits with the previous book. But as I've been saying here, not terrible, as it would have been easily available. Nowadays, in Integral or just going to your comic book shop if you're looking for Thorgal, shouldn't be too terrible to get both books, even at very decent price, because often enough they've got discounted prices for the first few issues of those books. Throughout the story, the rivalry between Thorgal and Bjorn is a little bit weird, especially looking at the previous book. With Bjorn existing, Gandalf had a rightful heir. So, few of the reasons he had for disliking Thorgal for trying to steal his throne don't quite make sense, because if he has a rightful heir, the rightful heir would take over normally. Of course, Thorgal still would have a bit of a claim because he was the adoptive son of the previous king. There's a few weird things there. Two young men in their prime being rivals do kind of work. I would have preferred Bjorn not to die, and the dominant lord, Sliv's daughters, not to die either. Killing characters is always a problem in these kinds of book, because you could very well be reusing them later on for more effective storytelling. That's a weird element, but that's a common thing in all sorts of books. It really depends on what the authors want to do, or if they want to completely leave these stories behind. We get a lot of internal conflicts in the Vikings. We have them in full display here, either as during the archery contest, where it's a friendly rivalry between all of them, and then a more aggressive rivalry between Jorun and Bjorn while they're on the boat, and he decides to cast away Bjorn. Bjorn does invoke the Viking court when dealing with Jorun, saying that he would put them in front of the throne to discuss what happened. There's a sense of law and order, but it's very tense, and in this particular situation, it's just ignored compared to raw violence, which is the thing that Thorgal doesn't want to be a part of. So that kind of explains why Thorgal wants to leave the Viking people behind. There's no supernatural elements in this book. We had a lot in the previous one. Well, in this one, we don't have any. Everything is realistic to a point, and everything was replaced with pure science fiction elements, ancient aliens, Atlantean being going to the stars and coming back, things like that, which would be very popular in that period in the late 1970s. It's a big jump from the first book where supernatural was really present. We had magic items, we had a giant, a dwarf, things like that. I wonder how this was taken by readers at the time. It's one of those weird situation here that I can't find clear information on. I would expect it to be a weird it in a way. People would be like, well, the first one had a lot of of supernatural. This one is all sci-fi. Where is this going to go? And as we move through the story and the different stories Thorgal goes through, we always have that sci-fi, realistic, and supernatural element. It's a bit of a wave. It keeps going on and off. It's very interesting in my opinion. One of the big message in this book is think before you act. The Drakkar chase is an example of that. They should have gotten prepared before going. It wouldn't have ended with Jorun and Thorgal being cast away, killing Sliv's daughter by Bjorn. He's not thinking at that point. He's just acting, and it causes well, an entire civilization to collapse in a way. But it frees a lot of people at the same time. Not planning thing leads to people's doom very often, but over planning is also leading people to their doom because that's what the Witch Queen was doing. She was over planning thing, trying to get Thorgal to marry his daughter in a very convoluted way. This is a bit of a fun play on things. What do you think? How do you think it in a way? So should you think before you act? Should you overplan things? If you do think before you act, will it cause other problems to arise, etc.? So it's a wide variety of things, and you have a wide variety of emotions going through it. As we were saying earlier, there's a lot of material in there to be crammed in a 43 pages book, and I would say it would probably need about 3 more pages in a way. There's quite a few scenes, and everything is required for the full setup. We've got the pre-marriage scene, the Drakkar scene, the dream sequence, the canoe scene, the introduction of those Inuit rebel elements against the dominant, the travel and the fight against the Lord of the Three Eagles, and the big exposition dump at the end. Geez, that's a lot of things to put into so few pages. And a few of those things are not explored as much as they should. There's no wasted space in there at all. About the only thing that I could have maybe cut down was the dream sequence. Maybe move it from 4 pages to 2 pages to make the exposition dump at the end more digestible with a little bit more show and a little bit less tell. So it's overall very difficult to think of here. In the end, I would have almost split this into 2 books. The first book being the Drakkar chase and the canoe scene and the pre-marriage and everything happening on the frozen island being a second book. Would it have been too much for 243 pages book? Possibly. We'd have to look at the contract that the author and the illustrator had as well. So there's a lot of things that come into question here. As far as the action in the story, it's really well paced overall, but we get that huge exposition dump at the end. And that breaks the cardinal rule of comic, which is show, don't tell. Luckily, we have book 7, which shows us all of those details that we have here in that exposition is basically broken down in the first and third story of book 7, L'Enfant des Étoiles. We've already covered story 1 and 2 of that particular book in previous videos. You can go and watch that if you're interested. Final thoughts? Well, this book is the one that won Rosinski the Prix Saint-Michel for the best realistic art in 1979, as it was pre-published in Magazine Tintin between 1978 and 1979, volume 162 to 189, and there were jumps in between. It's a little. Remember that this is published weekly. That's how those pre-publication kind of work. I can't get up clear sales figures for this book. It's been released for so long that it is hard to get, but it's been in constant circulation since release. So we're at the printing number probably 20 of this book now. The numbers sold here dwarf almost anything that we see nowadays. This is a much weaker book than the first one, in my opinion. It gives us a bit of character development and background in one go, trying to move Thorgal away from the Vikings into other adventures. I'm not sure if that was the best way to do it. Like I said, I probably would have split this into two stories or two books. But you have to realize that for some of those guys working at the time, you wouldn't know if you were going to get a third book either. It really depended on how it was going to run in pre-publication, and if the pre-publication was good and the result there were good, you would be getting your book actually published, then moved forward. Let's say you read book 1 and 2, you will want to read more Adventures of Thorgal. Just reading book 1 is usually enough to make you want to move forward with his stories. I have book 3, Les Trois Vieillards d'Aran, here, ready to go. I probably would have to write a nice little scenario and script for it, obviously, because I'm not ready for another video just yet. But this is more than likely in the cards in the near future. I thank you very much for listening to me today and spending your time on me. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them, and I'll see all of you guys later. Bye bye.